This is part 3 for chapter 2, continuing our discussion on intercultural communication. I don't know why they waited this long in the text, but eventually they decided to give you a definition for intercultural communication. The definition is communication between persons who have differing cultural beliefs, values, norms, ways of behaving. So the communication across those boundaries is intercultural communication. Of course, depending on where you go and who you're communicating with, the level of cultural differences will vary widely. No matter who you spend time with, where you go, eventually, and I would even say with some frequency, you will be communicating cross-culturally or interculturally. It's inevitable. And so it is a skill that we need to develop just like any other skill. So how do we develop that skill? Where the first step is to educate yourself. Learn about other cultures. In some cases, we need to learn about our own culture and our own cultural norms. The perceptions that other people have of our culture can impact the way that they interact with us. But learn about the other cultures that you are visiting so that you can interact in such a way that's acceptable in their culture. Recognize the fact that you are lacking in those skills. Most likely, if you have never employed those skills, you're going to need to learn about those cultures so that you can interact in an appropriate way. You might ask, how do we do this? How do I learn about other cultures? Well, your textbook suggests that documentaries and movies might be a place to start, at least ones that are based in fact. But you can also look at things like that you'll find online. You'll find articles and blogs talking about daily activities and how people interact. You can also watch YouTubers and other social media sites for people create vlogs and the like. Those are good places to start to learn daily interaction type stuff. You can also do web research, of course, to learn the ins and outs of daily interaction. Especially if you were going to travel abroad, I always highly recommend that you look up do's and don'ts for Americans traveling abroad, if that's your situation. Recognize that in the situations where you are interacting across cultures that there are differences. Being ignorant of the fact that there are differences can cause communication to break down. But recognize also that within your own culture there are co-cultures. There are differences in those cultures. To say American culture is overly vague. There are so many different minor cultures that make up our major culture. Rural culture and urban culture are two different things entirely. And even to say that urban culture is all the same would be incorrect. Even within the borders of the U.S. So recognize that even within your own culture there are some differences that you'll encounter. And then, of course, there are also major differences across cultural barriers whenever you're traveling abroad, whether that's a country next door or a country around the world. Even if you are traveling to a place where people speak the same language as you, you may find that you don't use the same words the same way. There are dialectical differences. There are differences in the meanings of common terms and the ways that you use them. There will also be often ways of pronouncing things that are differing. So you may pronounce a word one way in your local area, but you travel to somewhere else, or they use the same language and they have a different accent, and so they pronounce things differently. Dialectical differences, using the same language so you can understand the words, but using them in at least a slightly different way than what the other person you're communicating with uses them. We all have stereotypes that we have generated or have been given to us of different people. People from different groups, whether that's from a country or a profession. So we have sociological and psychological stereotypes. These are fixed impressions of that group of people. And these can be positive stereotypes, they can be negative stereotypes, or they can just be kind of general. But working from the placement of a stereotype can cause significant communication problems when you're communicating one-on-one with somebody. We'll ignore unique things, important things about the individual if we work only from the placement of a stereotype. Be careful about that. Here you see a term, ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is really about working from your own cultural perspective and saying that it is the most important thing, or it is the correct way to do things. It's seeing other cultures through the lens of your own culture. It makes you turn a blind eye to what can be beautiful differences between cultures, but can also be very confusing differences between cultures when you're trying to interact. It's kind of spectrum based or continuum based, where you have folks that are very ethnocentric, meaning that to them their culture is everything and anything outside of that culture is backwards and wrong. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the folks that are very good at interacting with other cultures. And as you can imagine, acting from a place of ethnocentrism can impact interpersonal communication significantly as well. A lot of times when we come from a place of ethnocentrism, we come across as being condescending, as putting people down, and that's not something we want to do in interpersonal communication. Now we come to the concept of culture shock. Culture shock, as you can see the definition here, is a psychological reaction you experience when you're in a culture very different from your own. Your text puts forward that there are 4 stages of culture shock when you're entering into another culture. The honeymoon phase, that's where you're looking around and you're thinking to yourself, this is so cool. This is totally different than the way I'm used to doing things. That leads quickly to the second one, the crisis, which is where the communication starts to break down between you and others, where you start making mistakes, people start taking offense. The recovery is where you start doing some research, you start learning what's normal, which then leads to number 4, hopefully, where you make the adjustments and you carry on business, carry on conversations in a way that is adjusted to the culture that you are now experiencing. They also mention that there's, well, I guess you could call a 5th step, or maybe it's its own thing, and that's a reverse culture shock, when you return from that culture to your own culture. There's, again, an adjustment period, getting used to doing things the way that you always have done them once again. So if you want to kind of work against culture shock, and hopefully maybe even avoid some of it, familiarize yourself with the host nation or the host culture. If you're traveling abroad, do your research ahead of time. I always recommend this. So basically, this is just applying what we've already talked about in this lecture. Educate yourself, do your research, be adaptive. We can do this through forming friendships, whether that's online or in other methods, with people from that host culture. Even if they're not friendships, maybe just try to interact with folks from there. And in some maybe extreme cases, especially if maybe you are relocating permanently to another culture, you might even seek out professional help. Or if you are conducting business and your money is riding on the fact that you speak well and communicate well in that other culture, you might seek professional help. All of this just comes around to adjusting your communication to the communication style of the person that you are interacting with, in particular when they're from another culture. Each culture has its own communication rules, verbally and non-verbally. I know I've mentioned this before, but eye contact means one thing in one culture and something else in another. So if you're talking to someone from another culture and they are averting eye contact, they will not look you in the eye as you talk to them, they may be showing you a sign of respect. Or that maybe they're being deceitful. It depends on the culture. Communication accommodation theory, they mention here, basically it means what it says. We accommodate, we adapt to the person that we're talking to. Particularly with this theory, it's adapting to the listener's communication style. So if I know that you and I do not communicate the same way, whenever I open the lines of communication, I'm going to communicate with you in a way that I think that you will appreciate, instead of insisting that we communicate in the way that I typically communicate. It's a good way to kind of ease into a conversation, and this is useful in any intercultural or interpersonal context. So it's a skill in and of itself that is very useful to learn.